Uh, Brian Formato, welcome to the lockdown sessions. How are you today?
Good, great to be with you, Brad.
So joining us from the US, executive coach, founder of Groove Management. By the way, I love that name for a business. Just finding your groove instantly gets me smiling. And as an exec coach, we were connected via colleagues on LinkedIn when
Yeah,
we were building out a team for the US. And I think instantly connected when we had our first chat because we were talking leadership. And I thought, well, part of lockdown is bringing coaches and leaders onto this, onto these episodes to kind of talk about their passions. And when you were sharing with me the first time we talked some of your theories and ideas on leadership, especially your surfing program, which I want you to talk about a little bit later, I just thought get him on lockdown and get him talking leadership. And but your starter for 10, like everybody on these
yeah.
sessions, is the same question I give to everyone, which is, look, come on, what have you learned during lockdown? And you must have a different perspective because you're out in the good old US of A, and the world looks a little bit different there. I'm saying that with a smile
You-
tuck in my cheek. We won't go down the political route, but what have you observed from leaders,
yeah.
just in behaviours? That's your starter for 10.
This has been probably one of the most interesting movies I've ever seen. And
Right.
that I'm actually also starring in it, as are everybody else in the world. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, right? Is that we don't know how it ends. We don't know how it unfolds. And one of the things that causes the greatest angst for individuals and organizations is uncertainty. And so, one of the things that I've been really focused on, and especially with my clients, is control what's within your control and let be those things that are outside your control, right? And so there's a little bit of this, and we'll get more into the concept of balance, but really balancing, those things that are within your wheelhouse and that you have, the ability to script what happens next. For me, I'm fortunate in that I live in suburbia. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a beautiful lake. My backyard is the lake, and so I have the ability to get away in nature. And so I've spent a lot more time outside. I've lived a healthier life the past year. I've not done any takeaway food, and I've not gone out to eat at all. And so, fitness wise, as I'm about to turn 50 in a month, I'm in the best shape I've been in, physically. And I think if
Right.
you're physically in good shape, you're mentally in good shape. And so, it's been a unique year, absolutely. But I've been really pushing my clients on this idea of, how do you create that balance of not being stuck in front of a screen? I feel everyone's zoomed out, and it's like you just burnt out on technology. And so, for local clients, what I've been doing is encouraging them to get together physically outside. And so I have several coaching clients that I will meet in unique locations. One person I meet at a baseball field, and we sit under a gazebo every week. Another person has gone out paddleboarding with me several times for our coaching sessions. Someone else, we go and we walk these trails around a park. And so it's this idea of giving yourself permission to say that work from home isn't work from home, it's work from anywhere. Um, and that, the piece that we're missing really is the human connection, the physical connection that you have face to face. And so there are ways to safely do that. And so I've been really encouraging people to do that.
Um, and I'm just kind of rewinding. Did you say you paddleboard with one of your clients?
Yeah, I do. So, as I said, living on the lake, it's been kind of a fun way for me to get some exercise, see the sunrise or see the sunset. And so I had presented the idea to a couple different clients locally and said, yeah, I think this would be a fun way to spend an hour and a half together. And every single one of them was like, I'm game, let's do it. And what's interesting is that we went deeper in those conversations to more vulnerable places than typical. And so I think there's something about that liberating being at one with nature, not having other people potentially around that are listening in or being dressed in business attire, but really, being in, a bathing suit, a pair of shorts, and, and being out there. We had some really deeper conversations around vulnerability. And for me, that's one of the areas that I try to really push my coaching clients on is, the more you open up and can confide in me about the things that are giving you angst, the more I can help you to understand what the root cause of those things are. Because fear really starts from within.
It's a hot topic for me as well. So this idea of vulnerability, I was chatting with a senior VP yesterday, and we were talking about a particular leader in their team that we want to grow. And the big challenge for this individual is not his efficiency or effectiveness or his ability to execute against targets.
Yeah.
The ability of this leader to show vulnerability to his team and to his peers is actually what's blocking him. And it's such a fascinating discussion, isn't it, to explore vulnerability with someone, because not everyone can do it. Not everyone is comfortable doing it with their coach, let alone their team. How do you unpack vulnerability with someone? Because it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah. So there's a few different ways. One is this concept of nobody likes a know-it-all, and perfection, exists on Instagram. But the truth is that to get that one shot probably took a ton of fails and whatnot to get it. And so, we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. And so getting people to recognize that failure equals learning, and that if you put yourself out there and you are vulnerable, much better things are gonna happen. And I go back to several years ago when working for Time Warner. Dick Parsons was our CEO, and he was this amazing leader because, tall, larger than life, super gregarious guy. But whenever he got up in front of an audience, he would always tell a joke or two to lighten the mood. But the thing that was unique about his jokes is that he would always be the butt of the joke. He would actually tell self-deprecating jokes where he was the punchline. And it made him so much more human and so much more approachable, and it stuck with me. And so as I've gone on to coach CEOs and other leaders, I tell them about Dick Parsons and the experience I had with him as a leader. And then we talk a little bit about kind of the narcissistic leader versus the much more approachable leader. And this idea that approachability enamors others to you. And I believe strongly in this concept of servant leadership, that leadership isn't a selfish act, but a selfless act. And so if you want to get the best out of others and make them better, then you have to be willing to admit that you've got rough edges too, and that you've got things that you need to improve upon. And so getting people there is the trick, but it starts really with trust, right? And so I do a lot of team building work, and the foundation of any effective team is trust. And so the foundation of any effective coaching engagement is also trust. When you trust someone, you're much more willing then to disclose information to them. And so that takes time and rapport building.
And it's not, we're talking, when you talk about dysfunctions of teams, and of course, trust sits at the bottom of Lencioni's pyramid.
Right.
But we're not talking just about credibility and reliability, because actually what you're talking about there are the other two kind of elements of trust, which is this ability to create intimacy,
right,
and that kind of very safe space where people want to share. And also you've got to be able to show quite low self-orientation, right? You've got to make sure that the focus is on them, not on you. And I suppose leaders do struggle a little bit with that concept of, again, it goes back to your word of vulnerability. How do you balance is one of your words. So how do you balance kind of the vulnerability piece with the let's focus on your strengths
Yeah.
piece, because they're polar opposites.
Maybe they are, maybe they're not. So years ago, to try to explain this, maybe it was to my grade school daughter at the time. I kind of dove into the idea of Superman and why I believe Superman is the most powerful and the best superhero. Right.
Oh, well, we can debate that another time.
Yeah. So my concept on Superman is this. We all know that he is faster than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings, has X-ray vision. We know about all of his strengths, but we also know that Superman's one weakness is kryptonite. And I don't know what the weakness is of Batman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, or any other superhero, but Superman's come out and shared with the world what his weakness is, because he believes that more people will shield him from it than use it against him. There's always a Lex Luthor or some villain out there that's going to use your weakness against you. But so I use that concept with leaders all the time to say, what are your superpowers? And I built this into my Groove 360 tool. What are your superpowers and what's your kryptonite? And most importantly is not just what is your kryptonite, but how many people have you told about your kryptonite? And if you haven't told many, why haven't you told more people what it is? Because if you believe in the good of people, you'll recognize that they will actually help you work around it and shield you from it. And so that's the conversation around strengths and vulnerabilities framed around the concept of Superman. And it seems to resonate with groups.
And what does come up? What is the reason people don't share what their kryptonite is? What do you hear? Obviously, you don't.
Yeah, no, I think it's that there's concern about it. Goes back to trust in people and whether or not people are going to hold those things against them, and whether by sharing that vulnerability that you seem less than. And in a world, especially in the corporate world, where it is hierarchical and there's a ladder, and it's about the pyramid gets narrower at the top. The people that appear more perfect, people think are the ones that tend to get ahead. And I think conceptually that's wrong. We want people that have some rough edges that we know aren't perfect because we can see ourselves in them. When you see somebody that everything is perfect, you get, at least my radar goes up and I get a little skeptical of who they are.
Well, I'm with you. I think if we live in a world of Instagram and Facebook, then I'm really miserable, because if nothing is that perfect, right?
Right.
And I have I have nephew and nieces, but one of my nephews is a creative artist, and he wants to inspire hope through creativity. He loves the idea of sharing his process with people. And we did an episode of Lockdown actually with another sort of creative coach. And he said something really interesting, because he set up an Instagram page where he only shows paintings in progress. He won't share the final painting. He only shares the process. So they're messy and they're incomplete, and you're not quite sure where we might be going with them. But I love the honesty, the vulnerability of that, the artist putting something out there that isn't perfect.
Yeah.
And I suppose to your point, I wonder how many leaders, probably more than I imagine, are trying to maintain a perfect external facade that's probably harder to maintain than if they shared their kryptonite.
It's exhausting, I think. As we went into lockdown, in the spring, I was asked to do a workshop for an outplacement firm, and it was for people that are in transition because they lost their job. And as I was thinking about it and putting together kind of my presentation, I started doing some just quick homework on famous people that had been fired. And it is this amazing slide of everybody from Oprah Winfrey to Jeff Bezos to sports heroes and presidents and you name it, and CEOs of great companies. And you look at all these people, and I just put them on a slide, and I said, what do all these people have in common? And the feedback is, oh, they're super wealthy, they're at the top of their game, they're famous. I said, no, the thing they all have in common is they all were fired at one point. And you wonder if they didn't have that humbling experience, if they would have been able to get to where they are now. And so I think that, it's back to we learn more from our failures than our successes. And I think it's an important piece. And when I look at a lot of the coaching work, so I got myself a coach to help me kind of position myself in my business. And one of the things that was interesting, we started looking at where my work came from and the type of people that I was coaching. And something kind of a pattern started to emerge. And it was especially at the CEO level coaching. I have it's like 90% of my CEO coaching clients are first-time CEOs. And so not surprising, because there are more first-time CEOs than there are repeat CEOs, generally speaking. But so the concept then was position my practice around executive coaching as I am a coach for first-time CEOs. And what is it that first-time CEOs need? Well, they need a thought partner, a confidant, somebody that they can talk to about navigating uncharted waters for them. And it goes back to that vulnerability piece of, if you're the CEO of a company, who do you turn to ask the dumb questions or to share those vulnerabilities with? If you do it with your team, you worry that it undermines your ability to lead them, and they start questioning you and your positional power. And if you become too friendly with any member of your team, all of a sudden, you create favoritism. And so you want to be careful as the CEO about who you fraternize with, and that means that it's lonely at the top. If you're constantly going to the board with questions, then the board starts to question whether you're the right person or not. So the coach becomes really that sounding board, that confidant, that person to bounce things off of. And while most of my coaching is 2 formal meetings a month with these leaders, what I find is that the ones that are using me most effectively are the ones that in between those meetings are ad hoc shooting me, hey, I have a call today with an investor, or this person on my team isn't getting along with this other person, and just bouncing those impromptu questions off of me.
I'm working with a guy at the moment, actually, who falls into your sort of category there.
Yeah.
And double up with being an entrepreneur. And he does exactly that. In between the midway point in between sessions, and we meet every 3 to 4 weeks.
Yep.
Normally for somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. We don't clock watch, just it is, what it is. And without fail, normally based on something that's agreed at the end of the session that he's going to look into. And what he finds, and I actually find it quite cathartic myself, he finds it quite therapeutic, I think, to write.
Yeah.
And it gives him a chance to kind of download everything prior to the session, in advance of the session. And it kind of gives a clarity then and focus to our conversation when we come together. And it gives me a great insight, actually, into a shortened way of getting to actually what's really going on.
That's good. Yeah.
Right. So it works for both. And he did it again. Recently the email came in the other day. He's based out in California, so with a time difference, it can sometimes be late at night when I'm seeing that pop in. So I have to control for my balance not to open it. But I think that for me, it goes back to your point about leaders need someone to show that vulnerability to first.
Yeah.
Before they can go and show that vulnerability internally within the organization, especially as a new CEO, where there may have been others in the business who thought they were going to get it.
Right.
If you're going to show your kryptonite, let's use your language there.
Sure.
it's a challenge, right? Because there's people looking at you with daggers in their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've talked about balance. You've talked about sort of the vulnerability piece. At Groove, you also talk, especially some of the stuff I've seen online as well, that I've looked into, this idea of leaders as individuals and really growing someone's individuality. I'm quite interested in that as someone who spends a lot of time working on leadership programs and getting leaders to come up with their purpose. How do you unpack sort of that individuality so it's not like an Instagram post and we're all just the same, smiling away with the 50th picture before we post it?
So I spent 20 years in a number of different companies, whether it was Time Warner or Ingersoll Rand or other larger companies, in an organization development, leadership development role. And so through that, got exposed to a ton of different leaders within those organizations. And then since starting my own business, even more leaders through programs. And what I found was that when I do these leadership programs, when we kick off with sessions on what is leadership and defining leadership, one of the activities I like to do is let's brainstorm a list of leaders. And so you just get a list of names and you start looking at them and you're like, well, how come there aren't more women, or how come there aren't more minorities, or are all these people, do you have to be famous to be a leader? And you start categorizing and looking at this list that the group came up with. And it's interesting because if you do it with a bunch of school kids, they come up with, a very different set. You get Taylor Swift and you get Big Bird, and adults, are going to, give you people that are famous from either their industry or, what have you. But I then dig a little bit deeper, and the idea is, can you apply trait theory? Is there a set of universal traits that all leaders have? Do they have to be charismatic? Do they have to be smart? Do they have to be this or that? What you find is that there is no one set of traits that defines a leader. And that gets at my definition of leadership. Leadership's about individuality, right? It's about pioneering. It's about being the one and only. And there's only one you on this planet. And so you can be the best leader you can be by playing to your strengths. And so what I've found is that if leadership's about individuality, the best leaders that I've ever met and that I've studied, the one common trait they all have in common is self-awareness. They know themselves better than anyone else knows them, and they know how they're going to act in different situations. And they've learned as a result of that to play to their strengths and to compensate for their weaknesses. And so that is, when I think about leadership programs, I think about it as a journey for participants where what they get out of it should be a better understanding of who they are and what makes them tick. And so there's a big difference between leadership programs and management programs. I think those terms have become used interchangeably in a really bad way. And I hear it all the time. Companies say, well, our leadership team or our management team, and it's one and the same. It's like there's two very different skill sets. There was an Inc. magazine article recently that said that leadership is the opposite of management, was the title. And I thought, and they said the person that can be a great leader and great manager is a unicorn. They exist, but they're really rare. And so really getting, I think of management training as a uniform result. You want everyone to come out with the same set of skills. Whereas a leadership program should be tailored to the participants such that each person comes away with a different learning, a learning that is best for them.
Well, and you can't teach everybody to inspire in the same way, or to enable in the same way, or to challenge. Management is very much about the bottom line. Leadership is the top line. Management is about process. Leadership is about, at best, behavior.
Influence.
Exactly. So, and I agree with you. I think that, listen, when we're the same age, so I passed 50 last month. When we first started out, going back sort of
Yeah.
30 years.
Sure.
I can remember conversations when I was part of a youth work and a youth management group and training to be like a youth manager, having these conversations about, what's the difference between a manager and a leader. And they were great. And actually, back then there were some very distinctive differences, and it was completely different program. I think then through the 90s and early noughties, it kind of morphed a little bit into one, because actually managers also had to lead, and it became a little diluted. And, in my day, my manager just managed.
Right.
My first manager, when I was working in the social care division of a local authority, council government run organization, working with statementing young kids with autism, his job was to sit in a room and talk to his 16 team members all day. That's all he did. That was his job. He managed.
Yeah.
But today, managers are also individual contributors. They have to deliver against their own set of results. They need to get everybody else delivering theirs. And they're also expected to lead. And so I suppose in even just sharing that anecdotally, it gets me thinking, who'd be a manager today, like today? Because you're asking for it.
Yeah.
So beyond that, because you talked before about, behavioral traits of leaders, do you see themes across the leaders you work with of those traits that do make for the most effective, productive leaders?
There's one which is probably the biggest differentiator between those that I've experienced, and it's this idea of lifelong learner and the concept of leadership is a journey. It's not a destination, and you never have all the answers, and that you're constantly on a quest to learn more and get better. There's a company that I did some work with that one of their core values is every day is a school day. And I love that, the way they frame it. And it's, you don't just come to work to produce, but you come to work to learn as well. And so there's the concept of leaders as readers, and that they read and are constantly trying to make themselves better. The know-it-all leader, I think they've peaked. And so leaders ask great questions. And so I've always been a big fan of helping people that are in a leadership role to be more Socratic in their approach. Simon Sinek is kind of the whole concept of leaders eat last. And so let your team speak and let them be the ones first. And you're always going to be able to have the final word, just from a positional power standpoint. But if you have the first word, then you taint the entire conversation in the direction of it.
I remember working with a group of coaches, training them as coaches. And there was this wonderful line where one of the coaches who had been part of a role play turned to the coach who had been playing the coach and just said to him, every time you jump in with a story of how I could do it, you steal the opportunity for me to learn.
Yeah.
It's just listening to you there. It's like that's that opportunity to learn, to grow, to develop. And some leaders get it, actually, Brian. Let's also be really clear. Not everybody does.
No.
Some use the authority and lean into that quite well. And I'm not judging whether or not that's good or bad, because that's not what we're talking about. But not everybody gets the Socratic.
No, and the hardest thing is that we are spoiled by our own successes, right? And so the hardest people to coach are those, because I coach several chief revenue officers or heads of sales, and they keep pointing to the bottom line and saying, we're killing it. Look at our sales growth in year over year and so forth, where it's going. And like, but will it operate at scale if you are a player coach? Eventually, you got to get off the field and you've got to be able to get the most out of your team, because otherwise it doesn't work at scale. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people, is that success taints our view of how much better we could be, right? And it's the whole good is the enemy of great kind of concept. Can I just continue to be the way that I am? And from a coaching standpoint, the hardest coaching engagements are the ones where somebody else, the CEO or the person's boss, has said, you need a coach. Because for me, getting that person to see it not as charm school, but as something that is in their best interest. I always tell the joke that how many coaches does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb has to want to change, right? And it's like, if the participant is a prisoner in the coaching engagement, it doesn't work. And I have one that I've been working with now, and I keep saying to him, you're one of several people I coach, and you're the only one that I lead the conversation every time. And it's exhausting for me, and I can't get in your head and think about it. The best people that I coach, they come with an agenda. They tell me what they want to do each session.
Well, I was talking to someone just this morning, actually, one of my coachees in Australia.
Okay.
And he's on a development program, learning to be a coach. And, he sends me videos of his sessions, and he's working with one woman. And you feel his pain because, that session starts with, what have you brought to the table today? And she looks at him blankly. She hasn't got anything. She's not giving it that thought. And it's a bit like getting a personal trainer and thinking that's going to make you get fit.
Exactly.
You've got to do the work. You're going to have to diet and change your eating habits and do the blinking exercise.
Exactly.
There's no point me buying a running machine and then not running every day. It's not going to get me fit.
It'll make you feel guilty looking at it. And
yeah, well, that's how I'm absolutely positive that's how gyms make most of their money, Brian.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. It's guilt. It's absolute guilt. I'm interested more now as we start talking, and we talk about leadership in some of these themes that come up, the ones that ask questions in a more Socratic way, calling people out to kind of be invested in their growth and their development, or calling them forward rather than calling them out. Sure. And also I like your nod to cynic. I saw someone on LinkedIn a couple of months ago had kind of highlighted his Golden Circle talk.
Yeah, sure.
Like, highlighting for everyone to go and watch it. Like, clearly they just come across it. And it was nice, right? Because actually we are always learning. I did send a private message because people started to comment, this has been out for 9 years.
Quite a few years, yeah.
And I did send a private message to say, hey, listen, here's a link to when it first was out, 2011. So, and we had a really nice chat, actually, and I knew them anyway. But the way they responded to this concept of, leadership starts with the self.
Why?
I just finished reading a book by James Scowler called The 3 Levels of Leadership. Okay. Which looks very much at how leadership starts. It's about your sort of, your personal, your private, and your public levels of leadership. It starts very much with your personal levels of leadership and your private levels of leadership. Which is knowing your values base, knowing your core beliefs, knowing what that purpose is, and then what you're like one-on-one with people, and then what you're like in a public domain, and creating a consistency and a congruence in the way you come across so that it is authentic. And it goes into the psychology and the motivation behind it. In fact, Scala's giving away now some free downloadable stuff online where you can answer kind of some Q&As on yourself. Really lovely. I really recommend it. But one of the elements is this thing that really strikes me in what you're saying is, how do we help leaders create that congruence between the vulnerability that they can show in a coaching session with us and the leadership drive that they're showing with their teams? How do you unpack that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. One, it's this impact versus intent.
Right.
And I think that oftentimes those aren't well aligned. And so they may be well intentioned, but the way that it comes across to others may be perceived differently. And so I think 360 feedback, or being able to solicit feedback from the constituents that a leader's interacting with, whether it's an online tool or whether it's interview based, is really eye-opening. And it opens up blind spots in terms of where a leader thinks that they're really good and it turns out they're not, or where they actually are overly humble and they're actually doing a better job. So I find that to be really helpful to, as some of the diagnostic and behind the scenes work that I like to do with leaders. The other is just, it's a pretty simple question, but I've gotten a lot of traction with it. And it's the idea of, would you thrive working for you? Right? It's a pretty simple question, but the words are very well and specifically chosen, right? It's not would you survive, it's not would you do well, it's not would you grow, it's would you thrive, right? And I think about thriving as being like a plant growing, right? And it's like even through concrete or through, it's this ability to flourish. And so, if you wouldn't want to be led by you, then why would anyone else want to be led by you? Yeah. And so it's a point of holding the mirror up and a point of reflection to really think about, how am I coming off? How am I presenting myself? And in a larger organization and more senior leaders, what I think they forget about is the fact that for the more junior people and layers below, they're intimidated by you. And that conversation with you, whether it's in the elevator or lift, as you call it, or anywhere else, it's hard for you to get the truth out of people because they're going to blow smoke and they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear. Right. And so that becomes more and more difficult the higher you climb in an organization, to be able to get people to really open up and be themselves and be vulnerable with you. The other is that the workaholic, unbalanced leader that is the first in the office and the last to leave, that's great for them if that's the way they want to work. But then they then say to their team, you don't have to be like me. You can take your vacation time and you can go home and you should have work-life balance. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. If they don't walk the talk and model the behaviors, right, then it isn't okay for everyone else. And so that's one of the reminders that I constantly make with my coaching clients is, are you keeping your expectation of everyone else at a different level than your expectation of yourself? And if so, you're sending the wrong message and you're sending mixed messages.
And even down to, if you're going to go on holiday and don't check your email. Don't tell me to go away and have a great time, have a break. You've earned it. You deserve it.
Yeah.
And Brian, listen. How do you get on with this as someone who runs their own business? Because when you run your own business, I know because I've been doing it 25 years, you never really switch off. I used to joke that I gave up working 40 hours a week for someone else to work 90 hours a week for me.
Yeah.
And I don't mean I'm sat at my desk for 90 hours a week. So anyone listening, please don't think that.
Yeah.
But you don't really ever switch off until you physically make sure. So what do you do to walk that walk?
So I'm big around routines.
Okay.
Right? And I think that helps a lot. I make a list every morning on an index card, and what I'm going to, what I should get done today. And I love crossing things off. And I'll even write things down that I've already done just to cross them off occasionally.
Psychologically very pleasing. We could explore that in another session if you like.
So that's something. I definitely use my scheduling and so forth tool. But so I'm a creature of habit. I like to work out. I'm a big data nerd, so I wear my Garmin watch and I track all my runs and whatever else I'm doing. And so I run every other day, and I haven't missed a day, an alternating day for a couple of years. And so But what I found was that getting up this morning, I ran in the dark and it was terrible and I hated it. But I just have a packed day. But on a day when I don't and I have time, my favorite is to run around 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm awake, alive, and refreshed. And when I first started doing this, my wife hated the concept because she's like, everyone's going to think you're unemployed because you're out and about. But since COVID, everybody's home. So now it's okay. But the point is that I can create my own schedule. I can go out on my paddleboard in the middle of the day because I am going to be on a call at 7 in the evening talking to somebody in California, yeah, or up early talking to someone in Europe, and it all just works out. And so I make certain that I work to get the work done. I'm passionate about it, so it doesn't feel like work. Um, and we're empty nesters, so and my wife works full time, so we are back to a stage where we can be more married to our work than we were raising our daughter. But it can get tricky at times when you are overwhelmed with it. The type of work that we do requires a lot of mental capacity because you really want to give 100% to each coaching client when you're with them, or prepping for a workshop or what have you. So it's exhausting work, but it's also rewarding because I feel like I'm making a difference in the lives of others. And so I feed off of that energy.
I like that. I know that I get the energy too, but there are days when I might come in from my office, which is at the bottom of my garden, and I come into the house and I'm dribbling like Homer Simpson, quite frankly. I mean, there isn't anything left in the tank.
Yeah.
And I like that because when I used to sort of coach sports, I always used to say to my team, and I coached women's football for a decade, and I used to say to them, don't leave anything on the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come back in here and wish you'd have done a little bit more. And I say the same to my team, whether it's a workshop, if it's a coaching session, don't leave anything out there.
Yeah.
You've got to put it in now,
yeah.
Otherwise you regret. And I like the idea of that balance. Running, I find, as well as a runner. So I run every day. So I normally do 40 days on and a couple of days off.
Yeah.
I started a challenge at the beginning of the year. So it's just a virtual challenge it was 2,500 kilometers to run for the year.
Yeah.
Which averages out about 200, 210 a month.
Yeah.
I've realized I'm going to make it probably with 3 weeks to spare. So about 3 weeks ago, I thought, I'm going to make it. So new challenge. And there's this app I use called Missions, Me and My Missions, right?
Yeah. Cool.
So I'm now running the length of the UK is my next mission, which is about 2,200 kilometers. So every run I put on the Runkeeper app automatically logs into it, and you get little postcards sent to you of where you are in the UK. And I know from what you're saying that physical strength, that physical fitness drives a mental acuity that helps that
100%. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the first things, when I've done work with people that are in career transition, looking for a job and so forth, I was telling them that, use this time to get in the best physical shape of your life, because mentally strong will make you, or physically strong will make you mentally stronger. And you'll have time on your hands, and at least you'll feel more productive having done that. And pre-COVID, it was always, and if you're going to join a gym, don't go to the gym in the middle of the day when no one's there. Go to the gym when people that actually have full-time jobs are there, because there's an opportunity to network. You may find your next job by chatting up the person that's working with the free weights next to you.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't get a job with me, because when I'm on the machines, I just can't speak. I marvel at
plugged in and you're
yeah, I'm in my zone. I marvel at people who can run and talk and exercise and talk. I've just got to focus. We've almost come full circle. I feel like there's one last question, which is, we started with what's your observations been in leaders. maybe for you, Brian, on this last question, it's, what have you learned about yourself during this process?
Yeah, so I feel like I've grown tremendously through the interactions that I have with different coaches, and trying to put different coachees and put myself in their shoes, or see the struggles that other people are having, and helps me to figure out how to navigate. Now, having worked in companies and having led teams of people, to now leading a company, but really I lead myself more than I lead anyone else. I have 6 adjunct people that work with me on a per project basis, but man, it's lonely, right? And I'm a gregarious person. And so I write a blog. I find that writing is my way of pontificating and getting a message out there and sharing my thoughts in ways that I otherwise would have shared them with my team in the past. I find that I've gotten more disciplined about my business in the way that I hunt for new business, the way I farm existing business. I much prefer the delivery than the sales process. And it took some time to figure out that it's not that I don't like sales. I don't like prospecting. Finding somebody with a buying need, not fun to me. But once somebody says, I'm in the market for a leadership program, or I'm in the market for a coach, why me? That's a much more enjoyable conversation. And so I continue to learn and have to kind of navigate all of this. And I had mentioned kind of surfing as a hobby of mine, a passion of mine. I run a leadership program called Leader Surf, which teaches leaders how to surf. And I use it because it teaches them vulnerability and failure. You put a bunch of business executives that think they're already awesome in the ocean, and they get smacked around by a bunch of waves and they look pretty silly. It's a quick learn about vulnerability. But for me, it's this idea of you can't control the ocean, just like you can't control your team, but you can adjust the way you position yourself to harness its power. And a leader is really about influencing and harnessing the power of those around them, rather than trying to manipulate and prod. A manager tends to use those heavy-handed tactics, whereas a leader, it's much more about finesse.
Yeah, I love that idea of harnessing the power. I know when I first learned to windsurf, it was on a lake in south of France.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, really, it was absolutely stunning. I was 17, 18 years old. I'm low center of gravity. I enjoyed the process of learning it. And then a Mistral picked up on the lake and took me 4.5 kilometers down. Not really. Because I had no idea what to do at this point. And you just got to go with it, right? I mean, literally, you go with it. But I love that idea of harnessing. And that kind of, for me, is such an infinite, it's part of that infinite wisdom that leaders could share with others. Let me harness your power rather than prod you and carrot and stick you and try and motivate. That's not what it's about. It's, can I influence that outcome? Brian, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. We're working together on a program that's going to develop leaders and coaches. So we're perfectly matched for these kind of discussions. Will you come back in the new year, and when we're about to launch that program, and we'll do another conversation?
Absolutely. No, this was great, Brad. I appreciate you interviewing me and giving me a platform. So this was great.
Love it. Brian, listen, you've got a busy day. Go and prepare for your coaching session.
All right. Thanks so much.
That was cool. Thanks, Brad. See you soon.
All right. Cool.